We need to wake up America.
If it's working, Senator, do you now have a better estimate of when American forces can come home from Iraq?
No, but that's not too important.
They're using this this idea of patriotism and honor. That's bullshit. That's bullshit. How about sending home the soldiers with their lives? 70% of the people are against the war. 70% of Americans have been against the war for a long time. How about representing them?
Do you believe the Iraq War was about the oil all along? Ryan says, I served in the Marine Corps for 2 tours in Iraq. Even though the missions were always under the heading of Operation Iraqi Freedom, OIF, we would always call it Operation Iraqi Liberation, OIL. Does that answer your question?
Obviously, we've got national security interests in oil supplies in the region. And as president, that's something that I would factor in.
My friends, I will have an energy policy that we will be talking about, which will eliminate our dependence on oil from the Middle East, that will then prevent us from having ever to send our young men and women into conflict again in the Middle East.
If the intelligence came out and said, we know that Saddam Hussein does not have biological or chemical or a nuclear program, would you still have voted to authorize the war?
Well, obviously, given the information that we have, changes your decision-making process. But Saddam Hussein was still a threat. The sanctions were breaking down. There was a multi-billion-dollar oil for food scandal in the United Nations. Every day, American airplanes were being shot at. Saddam Hussein had used and acquired weapons of mass destruction in the past, and there was no doubt there was going to be in the future. The problem in Iraq, my friend, was not whether we went in or not. It's the way it was mishandled after the initial invasion.
No, but Senator, it's an important question because President Bush has said, even if I knew he did not have biological, chemical, or nuclear program, I still would go into Iraq to topple Saddam Hussein. Would you have?
Yes.
A war for oil? Do we hear this wrong, or did John McCain just admit, confess if you will, today, that we're fighting in Iraq for oil? You know, if somebody else were to say that, they'd be accused of being a communist or a radical or whatever, a leftist. For John McCain to say that we're fighting in the Middle East to protect our oil sources is an astounding development.
And this war is not about honor. This war is about profiteering. This war is about money. You have civilians, private contractors who are sitting in Iraq and on fat asses doing nothing, getting paid $100,000 plus, while KBR is getting billions of dollars in contracts, unaccounted for. No big contracts, KBR along with the other companies. And you know what's the worst part? Is these politicians sending us to war who have their stocks and their money invested in these wars. And that's what's profiteering. We're nothing but pawns being used for their political agenda.
This construction, Senator, is extremely simple. If your surge worked, the troops would be home from Iraq. Or most of them would be. Or all of them who were surged would be. Or at least we'd have the same number of troops in Iraq now as we did then. Or maybe one or 2 guys would be out of harm's way by now. Please, Senator McCain, stop. This is now embarrassing.
That's not right, Senator McCain. That's not right.
Would you as president be willing to have a military surge in Afghanistan in order to once and for all eliminate the Taliban?
Yes, I think that's what we need. I think we need more troops there. So we're also going to have to address the situation in Pakistan to hunt down Al-Qaeda and make sure that that does not become a safe haven for them.
Now, I won't stand here and pretend that we can or should undo the economic transformations that have taken place over the last decade. Globalization is here to stay. There are jobs that aren't coming back, and this world will always be more competitive.
What about the candidate Ron Paul, who's talking about bringing the powers of the Federal Reserve back to the U.S. government, under the presidential control or control of Congress?
I haven't read about that. That's an issue. He's one of the Republicans.
He's a Republican candidate, and that's what he's publicly calling for. So,
I would not look upon that as one of the great issues that needs to be addressed at this time.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society. And we are, as a people, inherently and historically opposed to secret societies, to secret oaths, and to secret proceedings. We decided long ago that the dangers of excessive and unwarranted concealment of pertinent facts far outweighed the dangers which are cited to justify it. Even today, there is little value in opposing the threat of a closed society by imitating its arbitrary restrictions. Even today, there is little value in ensuring the survival of our nation if our traditions do not survive with it. And there is very grave danger that an announced need for increased security will be seized upon by those anxious to expand its meaning to the very limits of official censorship and concealment. That I do not intend to permit to the extent that it's in my control. And no official of my administration, whether his rank is high or low, civilian or military, should interpret my words here tonight as an excuse to censor the news, to stifle dissent, to cover up our mistakes, or to withhold from the press and the public the facts they deserve to know. For we are opposed around the world by a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies primarily on covert means for expanding its sphere of influence, on infiltration instead of invasion, on subversion instead of election, on intimidation instead of free choice, on guerrillas by night instead of armies by day. It is a system which has conscripted vast human and material resources into the building of a tightly knit, highly efficient machine that combines military, diplomatic, intelligence, economic, scientific, and political operations. Its preparations are concealed, not published. Its mistakes are buried, not headlined. Its dissenters are silenced, not praised. No expenditure is questioned, no rumor is printed, no secret is revealed. No president should fear public scrutiny of his program, for from that scrutiny comes understanding, and from that understanding comes support or opposition, and both are necessary.
For increasing presidential powers, as it's been discussed, is rather disturbing to me. This whole idea that we're supposed to sacrifice liberty for security, we were advised against that. Don't we remember that when you sacrifice liberty for security, you lose both? That's what's happening in this country today.
You know, when I joined the military, I raised my hand and said that I'll protect the Constitution of the United States and its people, and against foreign and domestic enemies. But guess what? I did not raise my hand to protect private companies like KBR and put my life on the line so they can make a buck. When are we going to realize that people fighting in Iraq against us, they're not terrorists, they're soldiers? What would we do if somebody invaded us? I know I will pick up my weapon and fight against them. What the hell we call them? Terrorists? These people want their country back. Let's give them their country back. It's that simple.
Can you be a good Republican if you don't campaign for the Republican candidate, particularly when you've still got an amazing well of support out there?
Well, maybe you're a good Republican if you stand up for Republican principles. I would argue that leadership in the last 10 years have drifted from Republican principles. Deficit financing, big government, more taxes, more bureaucracy, more regulations, more entitlements, policing the world, but that's not what we stand for. So I would say that our position is very much in tune with being a good Republican.
And, you know, so the truth is actually words do inspire. Words do help people get involved. Words do help members of Congress get into power so that they can be part of a coalition to deliver healthcare reform, to deliver a bold energy policy. Yeah, don't discount that power, because when the American people are determined that something is going to happen, then it happens.